she was in pain, that somebody had pulled her from her home a couple days before, and she didn't know where to go for help. We've also spoken with some small mom-and-pop businessmen and women, one of whom had a liquor store that had been in the family for 3 generations. We stood with him on what remained of the store, Catherine, and it was nothing. We were standing on roof tiles, on empty liquor bottles, tin cans. I stood and watched as a mother and wife cried openly as she watched what had been her family's home burn in a huge, huge blaze, and firefighters were there trying to no avail to put the fire out. There was a bike, kids' toys there. She stood there watching all of this basically evaporate before her eyes. It's eerie here. That's the best way to describe it, because you can drive through certain parts of town, Catherine, and it's as if nothing had happened. I was under the impression when we first arrived this morning that I was going to see something that was similar to like a Nagasaki or Hiroshima, where everything would be destroyed. But in fact, the way this earthquake hit, there were some buildings that were not touched for blocks and blocks and blocks. And then you would go into other neighborhoods, some of the older neighborhoods, and it looked as if something from a science fiction movie, where one of the monsters would come through these towns and just step on buildings and whack its tail up against others. It's really sad, especially when you go into some of these homeless shelters and see a room filled with people who have nothing more than the clothing on their backs. They've lost everything, and they don't know what they're going to do, because insurance here is so exorbitant that most people do not have any money. The homes that they had were the only place that they could live. And there's no hope at this point that they're going to get some money to rebuild. So, Catherine, it's a sad situation here, and as you mentioned, the death toll only continues to rise.
All right, thank you. That was Andrea Koppel. Well, one survivor says the devastation in Kobe reminds him of a World War II bombing, but that this time silence replaced the warning provided by plane engines. Japan's prime minister surveyed the damage and spoke about it a short time ago. CNN's Mike Chinoy is following the story from Tokyo, and he's joining us now. Mike?
Catherine, first, we have updated casualty figures from just a few minutes ago. The death toll now 3,517. The injured 19,523. 861 people are still listed as missing. As the relief operation got into high gear, the Prime Minister of Japan went to Kobe for a first-hand look at the devastation. Beyond imagination, that's how Prime Minister Tomoichi Murayama described what he saw in Kobe. The Prime Minister spent much of Thursday in the stricken city, inspecting damage, talking to local residents, expressing condolences to relatives of those who died, and assessing what is needed both for the present emergency and long-term reconstruction.
Our first priority is to rescue people who are still missing, and we must supply water, gas, food, and blankets to those who lost their homes.
The Prime Minister said experts were working frantically to restore water, electricity, and gas supplies as soon as possible. But it would take 2 days at least, he acknowledged, before any water flows through the taps, and much longer for the rest of the infrastructure to be repaired. He said emergency funds were being allocated for immediate needs, but that the government would have to pass a supplemental budget to rebuild the city. And that process, he acknowledged, will require a major rethink to make sure Kobe is less vulnerable if there is a next time.
This is our first experience with such a big quake directly hitting such a big city. We think that the building codes were not designed for this type of disaster. Now we must call on experts to study how best to rebuild.
Murayama visited Kobe at a time of growing criticism of his government's handling of the relief operation. As Japan's fourth prime minister in a year and the leader of a weak and divided coalition, this crisis was the last thing he needed. It's a test for him and for the bureaucratic institutions that run this country, of the kind that they have not faced in a very